Imagine being so rich, so untouchable, that even a locked steel door couldn't save you. Imagine dialing 911, knowing you have only seconds left, and the words you whisper make absolutely no sense to the operator. What really happened inside that mansion isn't just a tragedy. It's a mystery that has haunted investigators for years. By the time you finish this video, you'll realize the most dangerous person in that house wasn't a stranger. It was someone the victim trusted with his life. Stay with me, because the detail hidden in that 911 call changes everything. This story begins in one of the most exclusive zip codes in America. We're talking about a sprawling estate behind iron gates, a property so massive that the neighbors can't even see the front door. This is where Julian Rothford lived. Julian wasn't just any rich kid. He was the only son of Alistair Rothford, a hedge fund titan whose name alone could move markets. Julian had just turned 28. He was handsome, brilliant, and poised to take over a multi-billion-dollar empire. But with that level of wealth comes a dark reality. You can't just walk outside and trust the world. That's why Julian's father installed a state-of-the-art panic room inside the mansion. It was a fortress within a fortress. The walls were reinforced with ballistic steel. The door was so heavy, it required a hydraulic system to close. Inside, there was a direct line to the police, its own oxygen supply, and enough surveillance monitors to watch every corner of the property. This room wasn't designed for comfort. It was designed for war. On the night of October 14th, Julian used it for the very last time. To understand the chaos of that night, you have to understand the people who had access to Julian. There were only three. First, there was Marcus, the head of security. Marcus was a former Secret Service agent, a man who rarely smiled and treated every falling leaf like a potential threat. Second, there was Elena, Julian's girlfriend. She was a model and social media influencer, beautiful and constantly surrounded by a cloud of drama. Their relationship was a public roller coaster. They fought loudly, made up extravagantly, and trended online for all the wrong reasons. And then there was Victor, Julian's personal assistant. Victor was quiet, invisible almost, the kind of guy who knew all the passwords, all the schedules, and all the secrets. He was the gatekeeper to Julian's life. 3 people, 1 steel box, and a sequence of events that simply doesn't add up. The timeline begins at 11:45 p.m. The estate security system logs Julian entering the panic room. The door closes and the magnetic locks engage. This is a one-way protocol. Once those locks seal from the inside, nothing on earth can open them except a code that only Julian possesses. Not the police, not his father, not a SWAT team with a battering ram. Inside, Julian is totally isolated, but he is also totally safe. Or at least, he should have been. At 12:08 a.m., the 911 dispatch center receives a call from the panic room's hardwired line. The operator answers, expecting a technical glitch or maybe a security test. What she hears instead is a young man's voice, distorted by static and fear. The audio is chaotic. Heavy, gasping breaths dominate the recording. In the background, a rhythmic thumping sound echoes, like someone slamming a fist against flesh. Then, Julian speaks. But his words are a disjointed nightmare. He says, "They didn't come from outside." A pause, a choking sound. Then, he says, "The door didn't matter." Then the line goes dead. Not a hang-up, just a dead, empty silence. The operator tries to call back 4 times. No answer. Police dispatch a tactical unit immediately. They arrive at the estate in under 8 minutes. The mansion is completely still. No broken windows, no alarms blaring. Marcus, the security chief, meets them at the front gate, looking confused and pale. He tells them he was doing a perimeter sweep and heard nothing unusual on the comms. They rush to the panic room. The door is still locked. The status light is green, indicating it's secured from the inside. The officers shout through the steel. They bang. There is no response. This becomes a hostage rescue scenario. They contact Alistair Rothford, who is overseas on business, to get the emergency override code. The process takes nearly half an hour. Finally, the hydraulic pistons hiss and the massive door swings open. What they find inside redefines the word, impossible. Julian Rothford is dead. His body is crumpled on the floor. right next to the communication console he used to call for help. The cause of death appears to be severe blunt force trauma. But here's where the rational world falls apart. The room is completely empty. It's a 10 by 10 foot box. There are no windows. There is no vent shaft large enough for a human to crawl through. The ventilation duct is barely 6 inches wide. The surveillance monitors show the entire room and the hallway outside. There is no hidden cubby, no trapdoor. Julian was alone. He was locked inside an impenetrable vault, and yet someone or something killed him. The autopsy later confirms he suffered massive internal injuries consistent with being beaten. His phone is found shattered on the floor. The panic room log shows the door was opened exactly 0 times between his entry and the police override. 0. A man was killed inside a locked room that has no way in or out except a single door that never opened. Detectives scramble for answers. They interrogate the 3 people closest to him, looking for a crack in the logic. Was it Elena, the volatile girlfriend? She has a history of physical altercations, but she was miles away at a launch party, captured on 100 different Instagram stories, geotagged and verified. She couldn't have been in that room. What about Marcus, the security chief? He had the tactical knowledge, sure, but he never left the front gate, and the digital footprint shows the door was sealed from inside. He could override the system to lock it, but he couldn't bypass the internal sensor that confirms occupancy. If the door had been opened, the computer would have known. Then there is Victor, the quiet assistant. His room is in the staff wing. He claims he was asleep. But here is the first loose thread. Victor admits he had a fight with Julian earlier that evening. It was over money. A lot of money. Victor owed Julian something, and Julian was going to call in the debt. But motive doesn't explain physics. How do you beat a man to death without entering his cage? This is where the 911 tape becomes the most terrifying piece of evidence. The coroner realizes something horrific upon reviewing the audio. The thumping sound in the background, the rhythmic impact noise, it syncs up perfectly with the fatal cardiac trauma. The operator wasn't just hearing a struggle. She was listening to the murder happen in real time. And the whisper, "They didn't come from outside," suddenly carries a weight that makes the detective's blood run cold. Julian wasn't saying his killer bypassed the door. He was saying the threat was already in the room with him. But if that's true, the killer must have vanished into thin air, because the room was empty when the police broke in. That is the official impossibility of the Rothford case. It remains open, unsolved, a black mark on the justice system, and a feast for conspiracy theorists. Was there a 4th person in the house that the cameras somehow missed? Was Julian suffering a psychotic break, meaning he actually did this to himself in a state of self-destruction? The doctors say, no, the force of the blows was mechanically impossible for a man to inflict on himself. Or is the answer even darker? Did someone use Victor's inside knowledge, Elena's distraction, and Marcus's tactical blindness to execute a perfect, invisible crime? The mansion was torn apart, looking for a secret passage. They found nothing but dirt and concrete. No secret tunnels, no hidden technology. The Rothford family refuses to speak about it. Victor vanished 6 months later, leaving the country without a trace. So now I have to ask you. A man is locked inside a room that a missile couldn't crack. He is killed by an invisible force. He calls for help, telling the operator, the door didn't matter. What do you believe happened? Was there an assassin so skilled they became a ghost? Or did Julian Rothford unlock a truth about his own household that was simply too dangerous to survive? If this case kept your mind racing, you know what to do. Smash that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story that keeps the world guessing. Drop your theory in the comments. I read every single one, and honestly, I want to know if you think the killer was a ghost, a glitch, or a betrayal so perfect it was invisible. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp. The truth is, Julian Rothford was dead the moment he stepped into that panic room. Not because someone followed him inside, but because the room itself had been turned into a weapon weeks before he ever sealed that door. Let me take you back to something investigators almost missed. 3 weeks before that night, Victor, the quiet personal assistant, filed a maintenance request for the panic room's internal communication panel. Nothing suspicious about that. The system needed an upgrade. A technician came, did the work, and left. But here's what nobody checked at the time. The panic room's independent air supply. That sealed oxygen system I mentioned earlier. It wasn't just for breathing. It was connected to a chemical scrubber that filtered out carbon dioxide. Victor didn't just upgrade the comms. He secretly installed a secondary device, a micro diffuser attached directly to the oxygen line. It was small, silent, and programmed to activate only when the door sealed from the inside and the internal pressure changed. When Julian locked himself in that night, the sensor triggered. A colorless, nearly odorless gas began flooding the sealed environment. Not enough to kill him immediately, just enough to induce extreme paranoia, hallucinations, and violent neurological breakdown. The medical examiner never tested for it. Why would they? The cause of death was blunt force trauma, but what they didn't realize was that Julian was not attacked by a person. He was chemically driven to destroy himself. The 911 call suddenly makes horrifying sense. They didn't come from outside. Julian wasn't talking about a killer breaking through the walls. His brain, poisoned and fractured, was convincing him that something was already inside his body. Something crawling under his skin. The rhythmic thumping the operator heard, that was Julian throwing himself against the steel walls, trying to escape his own flesh. His final words, "The door didn't matter," were not a riddle. They were a confession. He had locked himself in with the one enemy he could never outrun. His own mind. The fatal injuries the coroner found were not human blows. They were self-inflicted impacts against reinforced steel corners, the edges of the console, the floor. A man in a chemical psychosis possesses a terrifying, unnatural strength. He essentially beat himself to death while completely detached from reality. And Victor knew. Victor knew the room was a death trap the moment Julian stepped inside. He didn't have to lift a finger. He just had to wait. When the police arrived, he played the quiet, confused assistant. The maintenance request was buried under layers of legitimate paperwork. The technician who installed the diffuser was an unwitting pawn. The device itself dissolved after activation, leaving no trace behind. It was the perfect murder, because the victim did all the killing. Victor's motive was never just about money. Julian had discovered something far darker. Victor wasn't just a personal assistant. Years earlier, under a different name, he had been involved in a financial fraud case that Alistair Rothford's company had quietly buried. Julian had found the files. He was going to expose Victor not just for the debt, but for an entirely fabricated identity. Victor wasn't going to prison. He erased Julian without ever touching him. The Rothford family eventually pieced this together privately, but they will never let it become public. Why? Because admitting the truth would mean admitting their billion-dollar fortress was defeated by a $20 chemical compound and a man who made their coffee every morning. The shame was too great, so the case stays open. Unsolved. A ghost story for the internet. Victor disappeared to a country with no extradition treaty. He's probably sipping a drink somewhere warm, knowing he committed the most invisible murder in modern history. A locked room, a dead billionaire's son, and a killer who was never even in the building. So, I'll leave you with this. Julian sealed himself into a box designed to keep every danger out. But he forgot the most important rule of survival. The deadliest threats are the ones you invite inside yourself. Sometimes the panic room isn't a room at all. It's a state of mind. And once that door locks, there's no code in the world that can save you. If this story stayed with you the way it stayed with me, do me a favor. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next case. And in the comments, tell me what you think Victor is doing right now, hiding in plain sight, or already planning his next move. I'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp.